The sound of metal snapping is a noise that stays with you forever. Snap. That was the specific sound my brake lines made when my own sister cut them earlier today. She did not know I was sitting just 3 feet away from her in a dark restaurant booth when she told her lover exactly how she planned to cry at my funeral tomorrow. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply paid my bill, quietly walked out the back door and called a tow truck. When the driver asked where to take my sabotaged car, I gave him my sister's address. I handed the keys to her husband and whispered, "This is a gift from your wife." 4 hours later, the police were putting handcuffs on her wrists, while I sipped vintage wine in my penthouse. My name is Jasmine, and at 32 years old, I learned that my life was worth exactly $2 million in insurance money to the people who were supposed to love me most. But they forgot one thing. I am not the helpless little sister anymore. I am the one who signs the checks. Before I reveal exactly how I turned their murder plot into their prison sentence, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a family member just to stay alive. Let me take you back to where this nightmare started just 4 hours ago inside the Velvet Oak. It is one of those upscale soul food restaurants in downtown Atlanta, where the lighting is low and the jazz is smooth. I was sitting in a high-backed velvet booth, waiting for an art collector who was running late. I chose the corner seat because I like privacy. That decision saved my life. Just as I was checking my watch, I heard a familiar laugh. It was Tasha, my older sister. She was supposed to be at a prayer circle with my mother, but there she was walking in with a man I had never seen before. He was tall with a sharp suit that looked a little too shiny, and he looked at her with a hunger that made my skin crawl. They sat in the booth directly behind me. The wooden partition was thin enough that I could smell her expensive perfume, but they could not see me. I froze. I almost stood up to say hello, thinking she was just cheating on her husband. But then Tasha spoke, and her voice was ice cold. "I did it, Marcus. I went into her garage while she was at the gym. It only took 2 minutes. Snip, snip. The fluid is probably leaking onto the concrete right now. She takes the Interstate 85 interchange every morning. At 70 miles an hour, she will not even have time to hit the brakes before she flies off the ramp." My heart stopped beating. I gripped my water glass so hard my knuckles turned white. This was not just gossip. This was an execution plan. Tasha continued. "The policy pays out double for accidental death. $2 million, baby. We can finally get away from my boring husband and live like we deserve." I sat there paralyzed listening to my sister discuss my death over appetizers, realizing that the woman I grew up with was not just toxic, she was a monster. I sat like a statue in the shadows of my booth. The waiter refilled my water glass, but I did not even blink. My entire world had narrowed down to the conversation drifting over the wooden partition behind me. Through the small decorative gaps in the woodwork, I could see Marcus reaching across the table to stroke Tasha's hand. He looked at her, not with love, but with the greedy calculation of a man looking at a winning lottery ticket. Tasha's voice was light and airy, the kind of tone she usually reserved for discussing vacation plans or shopping trips. "Mom really came through for us, Marcus," she said, taking a sip of her martini. "She guilted Jasmine into signing that policy 3 months ago. She told her that since she has no husband and no kids, it was her duty to protect the family legacy." I felt the blood drain from my face. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight it made me nauseous. It was not just Tasha. My own mother was the architect of this trap. I remembered that day clearly. My mother crying in my living room telling me that life was unpredictable and that I needed to ensure Tasha and her children were cared for if anything happened to me. She had called it family insurance. Now I realized it was actually a bounty on my head. Tasha continued, her voice dripping with resentment. "Jasmine thinks she is so superior with her art degrees and her penthouse view. She looks down on us, Marcus. She thinks just because she made her own money, she is better than everyone else. But she is just a lonely spinster. She does not deserve that wealth. We do. I listened as Marcus chuckled a low, dark sound that made my skin crawl. You are brilliant, baby, he whispered. Cutting that brake line was genius. The police will call it mechanical failure due to poor maintenance. And just like that, we are $2 million richer. No one will ever suspect the grieving sister. They clinked their glasses together. A toast to my death. I watched the condensation run down the side of my wine glass, fighting the urge to stand up and scream. They were not just planning to kill me. They were planning to erase me. To Tasha, I was not a sister. I was an obstacle standing between her and a life of luxury. She did not want to work for it. She wanted to harvest it from my corpse. I heard her fork scrape against the plate as she spoke again. Once the money hits the account, I am filing for divorce. Connor is useless. He watches every dime I spend. With 2 million, I can finally be the queen I was born to be. The level of entitlement was suffocating. She was willing to destroy 2 lives, mine and her husband, simply because she refused to live within her means. I realized then that there was no saving her. There was no talking this. I knew I had to get out of there, but I also knew I needed one final piece of evidence. A confession so specific that no lawyer could ever argue it was just a hypothetical conversation. I carefully slid my phone across the tablecloth, pushing it as close to the wooden partition as I dared. My hand was trembling so violently that the screen blurred before my eyes. I pressed the record button just as Tasha raised her voice, slightly filled with the arrogance of a woman who thought she had already won. She said the words that would eventually seal her fate. When the police knock on my door tomorrow afternoon to tell me she is dead, I will have to act devastated, Marcus. I will have to cry and scream and plan a funeral, but inside I will be picking out the color of that Porsche you wanted. Make sure you look sad too when you come to the wake. The callousness of her tone hit me like a physical blow. She was already planning her performance as the grieving sister before my body was even cold. I stopped the recording and saved the file to 3 different cloud accounts immediately. That was it. The smoking gun. Now I had to survive long enough to use it. I could not leave through the front entrance. To get there, I would have to walk right past their booth, and if Tasha saw me, she would know I had heard everything. She would know her plan was compromised, and a desperate person is a dangerous person. I slowly pulled up the payment app on my phone. I paid the bill and added a 50% tip, hoping the waiter would see it and decide not to come back to the table to check on me. Then came the hardest part. I had to physically remove myself from the trap without making a sound. I slid my body to the edge of the velvet bench, crouching low so my head would stay below the top of the partition. My heart was hammering against my ribs so loud I was terrified they could hear it over the jazz music. I kept my eyes locked on the back of Tasha's head, praying she would not turn around. I slipped my shoes off, holding them in one hand to move silently across the carpet. Instead of the front door, I headed for the service corridor near the kitchen. A busboy coming out with a tray of dirty dishes stopped and looked at me confused. I put a finger to my lips, pleading with my eyes for him to stay quiet. He hesitated, then stepped aside. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors and the humid night air of Atlanta hit me. I was out. I was safe. But as I stood in the alleyway behind the restaurant putting my heels back on, I realized the danger was far from over. I was standing next to the very car she had tampered with. My sleek black Mercedes looked normal under the streetlights, but I knew it was now a loaded weapon waiting to kill me. The humid night air stuck to my skin as I stood in the alleyway staring at my car. Under the orange glow of the streetlights, my black Mercedes S-Class looked pristine. It was the symbol of everything I had built. The leather seats were custom. The engine was a masterpiece of German engineering. But as I looked at it now, I did not see a luxury vehicle. I saw a steel coffin waiting to close around me. My hand was shaking as I pulled my phone from my clutch. My thumb hovered over the emergency dialer. Logic said to call 911. Logic said to let the authorities handle this. But I knew how the system worked. The police would come and file a report. They would knock on Tasha's door and she would cry. She would play the role of the concerned sister perfectly. They might even believe her claim that it was just a mechanical failure or that I was paranoid. I could not risk it. I needed undeniable proof. I scrolled past the emergency numbers and dialed Tyrone. He had been my mechanic for 5 years, a man who treated engines with more respect than most people treated their children. He answered on the second ring. "I need you at the back alley of the Velvet Oak immediately," I said, keeping my voice low. "Bring the heavy jack and your inspection camera. Do not ask me why, just get here." The urgency in my tone cut through his confusion. He said he was 10 minutes away. Those 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I hid in the shadows behind a dumpster, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Every time the back door of the restaurant opened, I stopped breathing, terrified that Tasha and Marcus would walk out and see me standing next to the evidence of their crime. I watched the valet bring other cars around to the front, listening to the engines start, wishing I could just get in my car and drive away. But I knew that was exactly what they wanted. I imagined the scenario they had painted. Me merging onto the I-85 ramp, the speedometer hitting 70. The sudden realization that the pedal under my foot was useless. The guardrail shattering. The fall. It made me sick to my stomach. Finally, a beat-up service van turned into the alley. Tyrone did not even wave. He saw the look on my face and went into professional mode immediately. He pulled out a hydraulic jack and slid it under the rear chassis. The metallic grinding sound of the car being lifted echoed off the brick walls, making me flinch. I felt exposed. "Hurry, Tyrone," I whispered. He grabbed his creeper and a high-powered flashlight, sliding his body underneath the heavy metal frame. I stood there, watching his work boots sticking out from under the bumper, waiting for the verdict. The silence was agonizing. I could hear the click of his flashlight and the soft scrape of his gloves against metal. Part of me prayed that he would find nothing. Part of me prayed that my sister was just a liar and not a murderer. But then the movement under the car stopped. The silence changed from focused to horrified. Tyrone slid out slowly and looked up at me. His face was pale beneath the grease smudges. He did not need to speak. His eyes told me everything. My sister had not just loosened a bolt. She had tried to erase me. Tyrone started tapping 911 on his keypad, his thumb hovering over the green call button. I reached out and gently lowered his hand. He looked at me with wild eyes, the whites of them shining in the dim alley light. "Ms. Jasmine, are you crazy? She tried to kill you. If she fails tonight, she will try again tomorrow. We need the cops right now." I shook my head slowly, my eyes fixed on the distant lights of the Atlanta skyline. "You do not understand how people like Tasha operate, Tyrone. If the police show up now, she will play the victim. She will hire the best defense attorney in Georgia using her husband's money. She will say, I am unstable. She will say, I staged this for attention because I am jealous of her marriage. Even if she goes to jail, she will go as a martyr. I do not want that." I turned back to him and my voice was harder than the steel chassis of the car. "I want her to lose everything first. I want her to lose the husband she cheats on. I want her to lose the money she covets. I want her to lose her reputation at the country club. I want her to realize she is nothing before the cell door closes." Tyrone swallowed hard, stepping back, as if he was suddenly afraid of me. The fear was appropriate. The woman who walked into this alley was a victim. The woman standing here now was a predator. I was no longer just the little sister who signed checks. I was the executioner of her social standing. I watched Tyrone struggle with his conscience, but he knew I was right. In our world, reputation was currency, and I intended to bankrupt Tasha before I locked her away. I pulled up the contact for VIP towing on my phone. My heart was no longer racing, it was beating with a slow, rhythmic precision. When the dispatcher answered, I did not hesitate. "I have a Mercedes S-Class for flatbed transport. Priority pickup. The drop-off address is in Buckhead." I gave them Tasha address. Tyrone watched me hang up, his mouth slightly open. "You are sending the car to her house?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you give her the weapon back?" I smoothed the lapel of my white silk suit and smiled a smile that did not reach my eyes. Because Tyrone fear is a powerful motivator. Imagine how she will feel when the car she thought was a wreck at the bottom of a ravine shows up in her driveway without a scratch. Imagine the panic. And more importantly, her husband Connor will be home. He is a car enthusiast. He will be the first one to look at it. I am not giving her the weapon back. I am delivering the evidence to the only judge she actually fears losing. I handed Tyrone a wad of cash for his silence and stepped out of the alley to catch an Uber. It was time to deliver a gift. I sat in the back of the Uber, watching the red taillights of the tow truck ahead of me. It was hauling my Mercedes through the winding streets of Buckhead like a hearse carrying a body. But the body was not mine. It was the corpse of my relationship with my sister. My phone screen glowed in the darkness. I had typed out a text message to Tasha. It read, "I know what you did." I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the send button. It would have felt so good to unleash my rage to let her know that I had outsmarted her. But I deleted the message character by character. Silence was a far more dangerous weapon. If I warned her, she would have time to come up with a lie. She would have time to cry to our mother or manipulate her husband. No, I needed the element of total ambush. I shifted my focus to Connor. My brother-in-law was a good man, but he was blind when it came to Tasha. He came from old Southern money, the kind of family that solved problems with checkbooks and country club memberships. Tasha had wrapped him around her finger, using his desire for a trophy wife to blind him to her greed. But Connor had one weakness. He was obsessed with cars. He treated his vintage Jaguar better than he treated himself. That was my angle. I was not just dropping off a car. I was delivering a mechanical puzzle that only he would be curious enough to solve. As we turned onto West Paces Ferry Road, the houses grew larger. These were not just homes. They were fortresses of wealth protected by high walls and security cameras. Tasha lived in one of the biggest ones, a sprawling estate that Connor had bought before they were even married. It looked perfect from the outside with its manicured lawns and gas lanterns flickering by the gate. But inside it was rotting. The tow truck air brakes hissed as it slowed down in front of the wrought iron gates. The driver looked back at me for confirmation. I nodded. This was it, the point of no return. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of the Uber. I did not look like a woman who had just survived an assassination attempt. I looked like a CEO closing a merger deal. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and cold resolve. I was about to walk into the lion's den not with a weapon, but with a set of car keys and a smile. The Uber driver pulled up behind the truck and I stepped out onto the pavement. The night was silent except for the mechanical whine of the flatbed lowering my car onto the driveway. It sounded like the opening note of a war. I smoothed my white silk suit, walked past the gate intercom, and headed straight for the front door. It was showtime. I stood on the porch of the massive limestone estate, pressing the doorbell that sounded more like a cathedral chime than a notification. The house loomed over me, a testament to the old money Connor had brought into this marriage. Tasha loved this house not for its history, but for the status it gave her. I took a deep breath, smoothing the invisible wrinkles on my suit. I had to be perfect. I had to be the loving younger sister doing a favor. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing Connor. He looked tired. His face was pale and he was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked like he had slept in it. When he saw me, his eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Jasmine," he said, blinking as if he was trying to focus. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" He looked past me to the driveway, where the massive flatbed truck was idling my black Mercedes strapped to its back like a captured beast. I flashed him my brightest, most innocent smile, the one I used when I was closing a six-figure deal with a difficult client. "Hey, Connor, I hope I am not interrupting anything. I am just here to drop off the car." Tasha called me about an hour ago in a panic. She said her Range Rover was making a weird noise and she was terrified to drive it. She asked if she could borrow my car for the weekend to take Mom up to the mountains. You know how Mom loves the heated massage seats in the S-Class? Connor stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked from me to the car and back again. Confusion washed over his face. Tasha wants to take your mother to the mountains, he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. That did not sound like the wife he knew. The Tasha he knew avoided family outings unless there was an audience or a photographer present. I nodded enthusiastically, doubling down on the lie. I know, right? I was surprised too. But she sounded so sweet on the phone. She said she wanted to make things right with Mom and spend some quality time together. She specifically asked for my car because she wanted Mom to be comfortable. I could not say no to that. I felt a twinge of guilt lying to him. Connor was a decent man. He was kind, generous, and completely blind to the viper he slept next to. But he was also the only person who could validate the evidence I was about to plant. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking at the car with a furrowed brow. That is really strange, he muttered. She told me she was going shopping with her girlfriends tonight. She never mentioned a trip with your mom. In fact, she usually complains about your mom car sickness. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Maybe it is a surprise. You know how she gets when she tries to plan nice things. She probably wants to show you she is making an effort. Connor sighed, a sound of deep exhaustion, but a small hopeful smile touched his lips. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe his wife was capable of selfless love. That hope was exactly what I was counting on. I reached into my designer clutch and felt the cold, smooth surface of the key fob. To anyone else, it was just a piece of plastic and metal used to unlock a luxury vehicle. But to me, and to the man standing in front of me, it was about to become the most dangerous object in the world. I pulled it out and pressed it firmly into Connor's palm, making sure our hands touched so he could feel that my skin was warm and steady, not clammy with guilt. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered the line that would seal his wife's fate. She was so specific about the safety checks, Connor. She told me she went out to the garage herself earlier today to check the fluids and the tires, because she knows how anxious Mom gets on the highway. She said she even crawled underneath to check for any leaks. She really wanted this trip to be perfect. I watched the transformation happen in real time on Connor's face. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes smoothed out and his shoulders dropped an inch as the tension left his body. He looked down at the keys in his hand like they were a sacred olive branch. He wanted so badly to believe that Tasha was the woman he fell in love with 10 years ago, not the monster she had become. I have been so hard on her lately, Jasmine, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. We have been fighting about money and her spending habits almost every day. I thought she was just being selfish and distant, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe she is really trying to turn over a new leaf and reconnect with the family. Hearing him defend the woman who was currently sipping cocktails and planning to spend his life insurance money made bile rise in my throat. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to grab him by the shoulders and shake him awake. But I knew that for the truth to destroy Tasha completely, Connor had to discover it himself. He had to be the one to peel back the layers of her deception. So I forced a smile that felt tight on my face and nodded. You are a lucky man, Connor. Not many women would get their manicured hands dirty checking a chassis for their mother-in-law. She really loves this family in her own unique way. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it, but Connor swallowed it whole. He gripped the keys tighter, almost affectionately. Thank you for bringing it over, Jasmine. I will make sure she gets it back to you on Monday in perfect condition. I took a step back, moving away from the warmth of the porch light and into the shadows of the driveway. I knew I had to leave before I broke character, but I had one final seed to plant. A seed that would grow into the destruction of his marriage within the next 10 minutes. As I turned to walk away, I paused and looked back casually as if I had just remembered a minor detail. Oh, Connor, one last thing. When I drove it over, the brake pedal felt a little soft. Since she said she was messing around under there, maybe you should give it a quick look before she drives Mom up the mountain. You know how dangerous those winding roads can be, and we would not want anything to happen to them." I saw the shift in his eyes immediately. The exhausted husband disappeared, and the obsessive mechanic emerged. He looked at the front wheel well of the Mercedes with a sudden professional curiosity. "I will check it right now," he said. "I would not want them taking any risks." I smiled and turned my back on him, walking into the darkness. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the explosion. I walked down the long driveway toward my waiting Uber, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind me. Connor was a creature of habit. He was a man who could not sleep if he knew a picture frame was crooked or a faucet was dripping. I had just told him the brake pedal on a high-performance German vehicle felt soft. There was no way he was going back inside the house to watch television without investigating. I got into the back of the car and watched through the rear window as the distance grew between us. But in my mind, I saw every movement he made as clearly as if I were standing next to him. Connor stood alone in the driveway, bathed in the yellow glow of the security floodlights. He looked at the sleek black beast sitting on his pavement. The keys felt heavy in his hand. He approached the driver's side door and pulled the handle. The heavy thud of the door opening echoed in the quiet night. The interior lights flickered on, illuminating the cream leather seats. And there it was, a white envelope sitting right in the center of the driver's seat. I had placed it there, knowing he could not miss it. It was not sealed. I had written "Service Report" on the front in bold black marker. Connor probably thought it was just a receipt from a standard oil change or a tire rotation. He reached in and picked it up. I imagine his brow furrowing as he pulled out the single sheet of yellow carbon paper inside. It was the invoice Tyrone had written up less than an hour ago. But instead of a price list, it contained a message that would shatter his reality. In the notes section, Tyrone had written in all capital letters using a red pen, "Warning, do not drive, brake lines cut with bolt cutters, malicious damage detected, immediate police report recommended." I can visualize the color draining from Connor's face. I can see his hands starting to shake just like mine had in the restaurant. At first his brain probably tried to reject it. He probably thought it was a mistake or a bad joke. Maybe the mechanic wrote down the wrong car. But Connor was a mechanical engineer by trade. He trusted machines more than he trusted people. He dropped the paper on the seat and pulled a small tactical pen light from his pocket. He dropped to his knees on the concrete, ruining his expensive cashmere slacks without a second thought. He shined the light into the wheel well just as I had done. He saw the severed hose. He saw the clean metallic snip where the steel had been sheared. He saw the brake fluid dripping onto his own driveway. The realization must have hit him like a physical blow to the gut. Tasha had not inspected the car for safety. Tasha had not gone to the garage to ensure her mother was comfortable. Tasha had lied. And if she lied about checking the car, she lied about the trip. And if she cut the brakes, she did not just want to borrow the vehicle. She wanted to turn her own sister into a memory. For the first time in 10 years, the blindfold was ripped off his eyes. He stood up slowly, staring at the front door of his own house, as if it were the entrance to a dungeon. Inside that house, his wife was waiting for a phone call telling her I was dead. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind Tasha, locking her inside the cage she had built for herself. She walked into the expansive living room, her heels clicking on the imported marble floors with a rhythm that usually commanded attention, but tonight sounded like a countdown to an explosion. She found Connor sitting on the edge of the oversized leather sofa. He was not watching the game. He was not drinking his usual scotch. He was hunched over, staring at a piece of yellow carbon paper as if it were a death certificate. Tasha clutched her designer bag tighter, her knuckles turning white. She forced a laugh, a brittle, high-pitched sound that bounced off the high ceilings. "Honey, you scared me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why is Jasmine Mercedes parked in our driveway? Did she stop by?" "I thought I saw her leaving." She was playing the role of the confused, innocent wife perfectly, but she made one fatal mistake. She did not look at Connor eyes. If she had, she would have seen that the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, hard realization. Connor did not answer immediately. He stood up slowly, unfolding his tall frame with a menace she had never seen before. He held up the crumpled service note, shaking it slightly. "Read this, Tasha," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Tasha took a step back, her eyes darting to the paper. "What is that?" she stammered, feigning ignorance. Connor took 2 long strides and tossed the paper at her feet. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. "It is a note from Jasmine Mechanic," Connor spat out. "It says the brake lines were cut. Not worn out. Cut. With bolt cutters." Tasha felt the room spin. She tried to laugh again, but it came out as a choke. "That is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Jasmine is so dramatic. She probably ran over something and wants to blame it on bad luck." "Why are you looking at me like that, Connor?" Connor pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Because Jasmine told me you were under that car, Tasha. She told me you personally inspected the chassis this afternoon because you wanted to borrow it to take your mother to the mountains." Tasha froze. The lie she had told Jasmine to get access to the garage was now the noose around her neck. Connor stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Since when do you inspect cars, Tasha? Since when do you know what a chassis looks like? You call a mechanic to change a wiper blade, but today you decided to crawl under a luxury sedan with a pair of bolt cutters. Explain that to me." The air in the room was so thick it was suffocating. Tasha opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in their marriage, her charm was useless against the cold, hard facts of mechanics. Connor was waiting for an answer, and the silence was deafening. Tasha did not just cry, she collapsed. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor, her hands clutching at Connor's legs like a drowning woman reaching for a life raft. She looked up at him with eyes that were swimming in tears, mascara running down her cheeks in perfect, tragic streaks. "Connor, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "You cannot possibly believe her. You know Jasmine. You know how much she despises me. She has been jealous of me since we were children, but this is insanity." Connor stood there looking down at his wife, his hands still gripping the damning service note, but his posture softened ever so slightly. Tasha saw that hesitation and pounced on it. She squeezed his knees tighter, burying her face in his trousers. "She did this to herself, Connor. She cut her own brake lines. Think about it. Does it make sense for me to cut them and then invite her over? Does it make sense for the car to end up in our driveway? She set me up. She waited until she knew you would be home because she knew you would check the car. She played you, Connor. She played us both." Her voice rose to a fever pitch, vibrating with accusation. "She wants to destroy our marriage because she is miserable and alone. She cannot stand that I found a man like you. She has always looked at you with those hungry eyes. She wants to break us apart so she can swoop in and save you. Do you not see it? This is a sick, twisted game to frame me and steal my life." Connor looked away from his sobbing wife and stared at the dark window where Jasmine had vanished. Logic told him the cut was clean and malicious, but emotion told him that the woman at his feet was the love of his life. He remembered how cold Jasmine had been earlier. He remembered her cryptic comments. Was it possible? Was Jasmine capable of staging her own murder attempt just to ruin her sister? The doubt started as a whisper and grew into a roar. Tasha sensed the shift in the room. She stood up slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, looking fragile and broken. "I would never hurt her, Connor," she whispered, stepping close enough for him to smell her perfume. "She is my little sister. I love her even when she tries to destroy me. Please tell me you do not trust her over me." Connor looked at the mechanic note one last time, then crumpled it in his fist. He let it drop to the floor. He pulled Tasha into his arms, holding her tight, unaware that he was hugging a shark. "I do not know what to believe," he murmured into her hair. But we will get to the bottom of this. Tasha buried her face in his chest and let out a long, shuddering breath. But she was not crying anymore. She was smiling. She had bought herself time. She thought she had won. But she did not know that her victory was about to be shattered by a simple text message. Just as Connor began to soften his grip, ready to apologize for his suspicion, a sharp vibration cut through the silence of the room. His phone buzzed violently against the marble countertop of the kitchen island where he had left it. It was a jarring sound that made Tasha jump in his arms. She tried to hold him tighter, to keep his face buried in her neck, to keep him in the safe bubble of her manipulation, but the spell was broken. Connor pulled back slightly, his eyes darting to the screen. It was a message from Jasmine. Tasha saw the name and her face twisted into a sneer. "Do not open it, Connor," she hissed. "She is just trying to poison you against me. Block her number." But Connor was a man who needed answers. He reached out and tapped the notification. It was a video file, no subject line, just a timestamp from 4 hours ago. He pressed play. The video feed was black because the dash camera had been facing the dark wall of the garage, but the audio was crystal clear. The high-fidelity microphone inside the Mercedes had picked up everything. The room filled with the sound of heavy breathing, followed by the distinct metallic crunch of bolt cutters biting into steel. Then came the voice. It was Tasha. There was no denying the pitch and cadence. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls, breathless and excited. "Cut it deep, baby. Make sure it snaps clean. I do not want any mistakes." Connor froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked from the phone to his wife. The woman who had just claimed she was inspecting the car for her mother's safety. The woman who had just wept about being a victim. He played it again. "Cut it deep, baby." The word baby hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Tasha's eyes widened in panic. She realized her performance had just been upstaged by reality. She scrambled for an explanation, her mind racing faster than it ever had before. "Oh my God, Connor," she stammered, letting out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "You are misinterpreting everything. That proves I was trying to fix it." There was a zip tie holding the mud flap. It was loose. I asked the gardener to help me cut it off so it would not drag. Connor stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You called the gardener baby. You told him to make sure it snaps clean." Tasha waved her hand dismissively, her gaslighting shifting into overdrive. "I did not say baby, Connor. You are hearing things because you are stressed. I said maybe. I said cut it deep, maybe. And even if I did say baby, you know I call everyone baby when I am grateful. I call the waiter baby. I call the dog baby. You are letting Jasmine twist a simple repair job into a murder plot." She held his gaze, trying to force her reality onto him. But this time, Connor did not blink. He looked at the phone, then back at her. The doubt in his eyes was no longer a small crack. It was a gaping chasm. He realized that his wife was not just a liar, she was a bad one. And for the first time that night, he wondered who the man in the garage really was. I did not have to wait long for the next wave of the attack. My phone lit up with the one name that used to make me smile, but now made my stomach turn. "Mother." I swiped answer and held the phone away from my ear, anticipating the volume. I was right. "Jasmine Nicole, what in God's name is wrong with you?" Her voice was not just loud, it was trembling with a rage I had never heard before, not even when I dropped out of med school to study art. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask if my car was safe. She went straight for the throat. "Tasha just called me in hysterics. She says you are trying to frame her for attempted murder. Have you lost your mind?" I stood by the window looking out at the Atlanta skyline, letting her scream. "You are sick, Jasmine. You are sick with jealousy. You cannot stand that your sister is happy with a husband who adores her, so you concoct this insane story about brake lines and bolt cutters. You need professional help." I took a slow sip of my wine. The gaslighting was generational. Tasha learned it from the best. "Mother," I said, my voice calm and steady. I have a mechanic report and a dashcam recording. Tasha is not the victim here. Elizabeth laughed a harsh, cruel sound. A recording. You probably doctored it. You have always been manipulative. Now you listen to me. You are going to get in a cab right now and come to this house. We are having a family meeting. You are going to look your sister in the eye and apologize for this stunt before you destroy this family reputation. I paused. A family meeting. In our house, that meant an ambush. It meant 3 against 1, where they would beat me down with guilt and biblical verses until I surrendered. They wanted to silence me. They wanted to sweep my near-death experience under the rug to protect the family image. But they did not know that I was no longer playing by their rules. I checked my watch. I will be there in 20 minutes. Mother, I said. Make sure Tasha is there too. I want everyone to hear what I have to say. I hung up before she could scream again. I went to my closet and grabbed my black blazer. It was armor. I knew I was walking into a lion's den. I knew they would be waiting with knives out ready to cut me down. But what they did not know was that I was bringing a grenade. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The scared little girl who wanted mommy approval was gone. The woman looking back at me was ready to burn the house down. Walking into my mother's dining room felt less like coming home for dinner and more like walking into a sentencing hearing. The crystal chandelier was dimmed low, casting long shadows across the mahogany table that was set for a feast nobody intended to eat. My mother, Elizabeth, sat at the far end looking like a judge in a floral dress. To her right sat Tasha, huddled over a plate of cold roast beef, clutching a tissue like a lifeline. Her eyes were swollen and red, a masterpiece of makeup and manipulation designed to elicit sympathy. But the person I was watching was Connor. He sat at the head of the table, silent and unmoving. He did not look up when I entered. He just stared at his untouched wine glass, his jaw set so tight I could see the muscle twitching. This was the wild card. Tasha thought she had him back under her spell, but I knew better. I took the empty seat opposite Tasha, pulling the chair out with a scrape that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Before I could even put my napkin in my lap, my mother began the sermon I knew by heart. "Thank you for finally gracing us with your presence, Jasmine," she said, her voice dripping with disappointed matriarchal authority. "We are here because this family is bleeding, and it is bleeding because you have decided to turn a simple misunderstanding into a war." She gestured to Tasha, who let out a perfectly timed sob. "Look at your sister. She is devastated. She loves you, Jasmine. She has always looked out for you, and this is how you repay her. By accusing her of heinous crimes, by trying to ruin her marriage with paranoia and doctored recordings." I sat there, stone-faced, letting her words wash over me. It was the classic playbook. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. My mother continued, her voice rising with religious fervor. "In this house, family is everything. We protect each other. We cover each other's sins. We do not go running to mechanics or lawyers to air our dirty laundry. If Tasha says it was an accident, it was an accident. If she says she was fixing your car, you say thank you. You do not try to destroy her life just because you are bitter about your own." She slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You are going to apologize, Jasmine. Right now. You are going to tell Connor that you overreacted, and you are going to delete whatever files you think you have. We are going to finish this dinner as a family, and we are never going to speak of this again." I looked at my mother, then at Tasha, who was peeking through her fingers to see if I was breaking. Then I looked at Connor. He finally lifted his head and met my gaze. His eyes were not angry at me. They were dead. I smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "I am not apologizing, Mother," I said softly. "And we are definitely not done talking about this." My mother stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped screeching against the parquet floor. She pointed a manicured finger directly between my eyes, looking at me with a mixture of disgust and authority. "Jasmine, you are acting like a prosecutor instead of a sister," she spat. "So what if Tasha went into the garage? So what if she messed with the car a little bit? She was just blowing off steam. She would never have actually let you get hurt. She probably intended to call you before you drove it. But you are taking a moment of weakness and turning it into a federal case. Do you really want to see your own flesh and blood in an orange jumpsuit? Do you want to see your nephews grow up without a mother because you cannot take a joke? I stared at her in genuine disbelief. The room felt like it was tilting on its axis. My mother was not denying that Tasha cut the brakes. She was admitting it, but she was categorizing attempted murder as a prank gone wrong. It was the most twisted display of favoritism I had ever witnessed. Tasha sobbed louder at the mention of her children, burying her face in her hands to hide the fact that there were no actual tears. My mother walked around the table and placed a protective hand on Tasha, shaking shoulder, glaring at me with pure venom. You have always been this way, Jasmine. Cold. Calculating. You think because you have money you can judge us. You think you are better than this family. Well, you are not. You are just a sad, lonely woman who would rather put her sister in prison than offer her a loan. Tasha did this because she was desperate, because she had nowhere else to turn. And instead of asking her why she was in pain, you set a trap. You are the cruel one here, Jasmine, not her. The gaslighting was so potent it almost had a physical weight. She was rewriting reality in real time, making the victim the aggressor and the predator the prey. I looked over at Connor. He was gripping his fork so hard his knuckles were white. He was listening to his mother-in-law justify the fact that her daughter tried to kill someone, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was realizing that this was not just a Tasha problem. This was a genetic defect. The entire bloodline was rotten. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. So let me get this straight, Mother, I said, my voice low and even. My voice. You are saying that cutting the brake lines of a car that travels at 70 miles an hour is just a cry for help. You are saying that if I had died in a fiery wreck tomorrow morning, it would have just been an unfortunate accident caused by Tasha's stress. My mother narrowed her eyes. Do not be dramatic, Jasmine. You are alive. The car is fine. Now drop it before you tear this family apart. A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was not a happy laugh. It was a dry, brittle sound that echoed off the cold walls of the dining room. The sheer audacity of this woman was breathtaking. She was not just defending a crime, she was rationalizing an execution. I looked Elizabeth dead in the eye and asked the question that would burn the bridge forever. Stop talking about stress and confusion, Mother. Let us talk about the $2 million life insurance policy you forced me to sign 3 months ago. You knew, did you not? You knew she was planning to cash me in like a lottery ticket. The room went deadly silent. Tasha stopped her fake sobbing and looked up, her eyes wide with fear. But my mother did not flinch. She did not look away in shame. Instead, she picked up her wine glass and swirled the red liquid, looking at me with a chilling pragmatism. Tasha is in a difficult position financially, Jasmine, she said, her tone casual as if discussing the weather. She has debts, real debts. The country club fees, the mortgage, the credit cards. She is drowning. And you are sitting in that penthouse with your art and your investments doing absolutely nothing to help her. You are her sister. It is your duty to ensure she does not fall. I felt the blood pounding in my ears. The twisted logic was suffocating. So because I worked hard and saved my money and she spent hers on designer handbags, I deserve to die. Is that it? I am just a resource to be harvested when Tasha runs dry. Elizabeth slammed her glass down, wine splashing onto the white tablecloth. Do not be so dramatic, she snapped. Nobody wanted you dead, but you have to understand that you have pushed her to this. You parade your success around while she struggles to keep up appearances. If you had just been generous, if you had just written her a check when she asked, none of this would have been necessary. But no, you had to be selfish. You had to hoard it all. You backed her into a corner, Jasmine. What did you expect a cornered animal to do? I looked at Connor. His mouth was slightly open, his face pale. He was hearing his mother-in-law admit that her daughter's predatory behavior was my fault. He was hearing the matriarch of the family suggest that my life was less valuable than Tasha's social standing. The mask was completely off now. There was no love in this room. There was only greed and the desperate need to maintain a facade of wealth. My mother did not see me as a daughter. She saw me as a bank account with a pulse, and right now she was angry that I was refusing to make a withdrawal. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I realized then that I was an orphan. My family had died a long time ago. All that was left were these vultures waiting for me to stumble. But I was not going to stumble. I was going to tear their world apart brick by brick. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. I did not hand them over politely. I threw them onto the center of the table with enough force that they slid across the polished mahogany and knocked over a crystal salt shaker. The papers fanned out, revealing charts, bank statements, and highlighted transaction logs. You talk about mortgages and country clubs, Mother, as if Tasha is just bad at budgeting. You talk about her struggling to survive in high society. Let us look at the actual cost of her survival. Shall we? I pointed a steady finger at the documents. That is not a mortgage deficit. That is a transaction history from 3 different offshore crypto casinos. Your precious daughter is not suffering from inflation. She is suffering from a severe gambling addiction. $500,000. That is the number on the bottom line. $500,000 lost in online poker and virtual slot machines in the last 18 months. The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. Tasha stopped breathing. She did not even look at the papers because she knew exactly what they were. She shrank into her chair, looking small and terrified. Connor, however, moved like a man in a trance. He reached out and picked up the top sheet. His hands were shaking so bad the paper rattled. He scanned the columns of numbers, and I watched his eyes widen in horror. These were not random numbers. These were his account numbers. Look at the withdrawals, Connor. I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Look at the dates. Every time you thought you were investing in a new business venture or putting money into the children's college fund, she was wiring it to a shell company in Malta. She drained your savings. She maxed out the home equity line of credit. She even took out loans in your name. Connor turned the page, and his face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He saw the transfers. He saw the lies printed in black and white. 500,000, he whispered, his voice breaking. That is everything. That is the kids' education. That is my retirement. That is the business capital. It is all gone. I looked back at my mother, who was sitting stiffly in her chair, refusing to look at the evidence. You knew, I said accusingly. You knew she had gambled away their life savings. You knew the loan sharks were calling. And instead of getting her into rehab, instead of telling Connor the truth, you decided the best solution was to cash in my life insurance policy. You decided that my death was a convenient way to balance her ledger. Elizabeth pressed her lips together into a thin line. She has a sickness, Jasmine, she said, her voice tight and defensive. She made mistakes. We had to fix it before Connor found out and left her. We had to protect the family unit. I laughed again, and this time it was loud and genuine. Protect the family unit. You were willing to bury one daughter to save the other daughter from a divorce. You were going to let me bleed out on the highway so Tasha could keep playing house in a mansion she cannot afford. That is not protection, Mother. That is human sacrifice. Connor dropped the papers onto his plate, covering his uneaten food. He stood up slowly, pushing his chair back until it hit the wall. He looked at Tasha not with anger, but with the look of a man who realizes he has been sleeping next to a stranger for a decade. You stole from our children, he said, his voice barely audible. You stole everything. Tasha reached out for him, her hand trembling. Connor, wait, I can explain. I was going to win it back. I just needed a streak. I just needed the insurance money to get back to even. The words hung in the air, a confession that she was banking on my death as her winning ticket. Connor looked at her with pure revulsion. Do not touch me, he said. Do not ever touch me again. I stood up from the table, and the movement was so final, it felt like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. The silence in the dining room was heavy, filled with the wreckage of a family that had finally been exposed for what it was. I looked at the three people sitting there. My mother, the architect of my misery. Tasha, the executioner who failed. And Connor, the collateral damage. I felt lighter than I had in years. For my entire life, I had been chasing their approval, trying to buy their love with achievements and compliance. But looking at them now, stripped of their lies, I realized their love was a currency I could not afford and did not want. I picked up my clutch from the table, my movements calm and precise. I did not scream. I did not throw wine. I simply looked at Elizabeth and delivered the eulogy for our relationship. "You wanted a funeral, Mother," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You wanted a death in the family to solve your problems. Well, congratulations, you got one. The daughter you knew is dead. The sister who bailed you out is dead. From this moment on, I am a stranger to you. Do not call me. Do not write to me. If you show up at my building, security will have you arrested for trespassing." Elizabeth opened her mouth to speak, probably to launch another guilt trip or a command, but I raised a hand to stop her. "We are done, Mother. You chose your favorite child. Now you can pay for her." I turned my gaze to Tasha, who was still trembling in her chair looking at the floor. She looked small and pathetic, but I felt no pity. She had been willing to kill me for a payout. I leaned in close enough that she had to look at me. "Good luck with the debt, Tasha," I whispered. "The insurance money is not coming. But the loan sharks are. And I have a feeling Marcus is not going to stick around when he finds out the bank is closed. I hope you enjoy the life you bought for yourself. It is going to be very expensive." Finally, I looked at Connor. He was staring at the wall, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was a good man who had fallen into a viper nest. "Get a lawyer, Connor," I said softly. "A good one. And change your passwords tonight." I turned my back on them and walked toward the archway. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was the only sound in the house. I walked through the foyer past the family portraits that were nothing but lies framed in gold and opened the heavy front door. The night air hit my face and it tasted like freedom. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the windows. I walked down the driveway to where my Uber was waiting. As I climbed into the back seat and told the driver to drive, I deleted their numbers from my phone one by one. I was alone in the world now, but for the first time in my life, I was safe. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, but before I could reach the door handle of the waiting car, I heard the heavy thud of footsteps sprinting across the gravel. I turned around to see Connor running toward me. He looked like a man who had just survived a bomb blast. His tie was undone, his chest was heaving, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of panic and confusion. He caught up to me at the edge of the driveway, grabbing my arm gently, as if he was afraid I would disappear into thin air. "Jasmine, wait," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "You cannot just leave me with them." "Is it true? Is all of it true?" "All of it." I looked at his face. The arrogance was gone. The denial was gone. All that was left was a terrified man standing in the wreckage of his life. I removed his hand from my arm, slowly maintaining my distance. I had saved myself, and now I had to give him the weapon to save himself. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small black USB drive. It was cold and hard in my palm. This little stick contained the backups of every audio file, every photo, and the full, unedited conversation between Tasha and Marcus at the restaurant. I pressed it into his sweaty palm, closing his fingers around it one by one. "Listen to me very carefully, Connor," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Do not plug this into your home computer. Do not watch it where she can see you. Take it to your office, lock the door, and listen to every single word." Connor looked down at the drive in his hand as if it were a grenade. "What is on this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I stepped closer, dropping my voice to a whisper so the driver would not hear. The rest of the conversation I heard tonight. The parts about Marcus. The parts about how she plans to leave you once the money clears. He looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears. But I was not done. I had one final blow to deliver. A blow that was necessary to get him out of that house tonight. I looked him up and down, scanning his body with a critical eye. Connor, have you been feeling tired lately? Have you had unexplainable headaches or stomach cramps after she cooks for you? Connor blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. I do not know. Yeah, I guess. I have been exhausted for months. I thought it was just stress. I shook my head slowly, giving him a look of profound pity. Go to a doctor, Connor. First thing in the morning, ask for a full toxicology screen, test for heavy metals and antifreeze. His jaw dropped. He stared at me with pure horror as the implication sank in. You think she is poisoning me? He stammered. I did not answer him directly. I opened the car door and slid into the back seat. I just know my sister, I said through the open window. She likes to keep her options open, and a widow gets more sympathy than a divorcee. I signaled the driver to go, leaving Connor standing alone in the dark driveway, clutching the USB drive to his chest, terrified of the woman waiting for him inside. Connor stood in the foyer for a moment, composing his face before walking back into the lion den. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and realization. He checked his pocket one last time to make sure the small black USB drive was hidden deep inside the lining of his trousers. That piece of plastic was his lifeline, but right now it was a radioactive secret. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive potpourri that suddenly smelled like funeral flowers, and walked back into the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The hysterical tears and the wailing were gone. The silence was businesslike. Elizabeth and Tasha were heads together over the table, the uneaten roast beef pushed to the side. Elizabeth was writing furiously on a linen napkin with a gold pen, while Tasha scrolled through something on her phone. They did not look like a mother and daughter mourning a family rift. They looked like business partners trying to salvage a failing merger. Connor stopped at the doorway, listening. The Aspen cabin is the quickest asset to liquidate, Elizabeth said, her voice low and efficient. The market is high right now. If we list it under market value, we could have a cash offer in 10 days. It should cover at least half of the debt. Tasha nodded, tapping her screen. What about the vintage Jaguar in the garage? Connor loves that car, but it is just sitting there. That is another $80,000 right there. Connor felt a wave of nausea roll through him that nearly brought him to his knees. It was not just the betrayal. It was the physical sensation of his stomach knotting up. Jasmine's words echoed in his mind. Have you been feeling tired lately? Have you had stomach cramps? He looked at the two women he had dedicated his life to. They were not discussing how to fix the family. They were discussing how to carve him up for parts. They were selling his dreams to pay for Tasha's gambling addiction. He realized in that moment that he was not a husband or a son-in-law. He was a host, and they were the parasites. He forced his legs to move. He walked to his chair and sat down. Tasha looked up, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of suspicion. Connor, she said, her voice dropping back into the soft, wounded register she used so well. Is she gone? Did she leave? Connor looked at his wife. He saw the calculation behind the tears. He saw the monster Jasmine had warned him about. But he knew he could not fight them tonight. Not here. Not when they were desperate. He picked up his fork, his hand trembling slightly. She is gone, he said, his voice flat and defeated. She is crazy, Tasha. You were right. She is just jealous. A look of relief washed over Tasha's face. She reached out and squeezed his hand. I knew you would see the truth, baby. We just need to get through this financial bump, and everything will be perfect again. Mom has some great ideas about how to restructure our assets. Connor looked at Elizabeth, who was smiling like a shark. He nodded slowly, putting a piece of meat in his mouth that tasted like ash. Whatever we need to do, he lied. I just want to save our family. He was no longer the victim. He was a spy in his own home, waiting for the sun to rise. The silence of the 42nd floor executive office was usually comforting to Connor, but tonight it felt like a tomb. The only light came from the city skyline outside and the glowing blue monitor on his mahogany desk. He had told Tasha he had an emergency conference call with Tokyo just to escape the house. He sat there staring at the small black USB drive in his hand. It weighed nothing, yet it felt heavier than a brick. Jasmine's words were still ringing in his ears. Do not watch it where she can see you. He took a shaky breath and plugged the drive into the side of his laptop. A folder opened instantly on the screen containing several files, photos, audio clips, and one video file labeled simply hotelroom.mp4. His finger hovered over the mouse. Part of him wanted to rip the drive out and throw it through the window. Part of him wanted to go back to being the blind, happy husband. But the gnawing pain in his stomach, the one he had been ignoring for months, reminded him that ignorance was no longer an option. He clicked play. The video was grainy at first, obviously recorded from a hidden camera placed on a dresser or a shelf, but the image sharpened quickly. It showed a hotel room. He recognized the layout immediately. It was the St. Regis where he and Tasha had spent their anniversary 2 years ago, but he was not in the frame. Tasha was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing a silk robe that he had bought her. Next to her was a man. He was younger, fit, and had a smug look on his face. Marcus. Connor watched as his wife leaned in and kissed this stranger with a passion she had not shown him in years. He felt bile rise in his throat. He wanted to look away, but then they started talking. The audio was crisp. Marcus poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Tasha. So when do we get the payout, baby? He asked, taking a sip. I am tired of waiting in the shadows. Tasha laughed, and the sound chilled Connor to the bone. It was the same laugh she used when she won a hand of cards. Be patient, Marcus, she said, running a hand through his hair. Jasmine is the big fish, but Connor is the safety net. If the car accident does not work out for her, we still have him. Marcus chuckled darkly. How is the old man holding up anyway? Tasha took a long sip of her drink and smiled. He is fading. That new herbal supplement I have been mixing into his protein shakes is working wonders. He complains about cramps every night. He has no energy. The doctor said it is just stress. She paused for effect. A few more heavy doses, and his heart will just give out in his sleep. Natural causes. And then everything he owns is ours. Connor slammed the laptop shut. He pushed his chair back so hard it rolled across the room and hit the wall. He scrambled to the private bathroom in the corner of his office and retched into the sink. There was nothing left in his stomach but acid and fear. He washed his face with freezing cold water, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His skin was gray. His eyes were sunken. He had thought it was overwork. He had thought it was age. But he was being murdered slowly, methodically, and lovingly by the woman he shared a bed with. Jasmine was not crazy. She was the only person who had tried to save him. He gripped the edge of the sink until his knuckles turned white. He was not going to die. Not like this. He walked back to his desk, picked up his phone, and dialed the number of the best private investigator in Atlanta. It was time to go to war. Connor forced himself to breathe through the waves of nausea that were rolling through his gut. It was not just fear anymore. It was biological. He turned back to his laptop and opened a new browser window. His hands were shaking so badly that he mistyped the words twice. He looked down at his fingertips. For weeks he had been complaining about a strange pins and needles sensation. Tasha had told him it was carpal tunnel from working too hard. She had bought him an ergonomic mouse pad and kissed his forehead. Now he typed the symptoms into the search bar. Severe abdominal pain, peripheral neuropathy, rapid hair loss, heavy fatigue. He hit enter and the algorithm did the rest. The results filled the screen with medical articles and toxicology reports. One name kept appearing at the top of every list. Thallium. It was known historically as the poisoner's poison because it was colorless, odorless, and tasteless. Connor leaned closer, his eyes scanning the list of side effects. It dissolved easily in water or food. It was slow-acting, mimicking the symptoms of a viral infection or autoimmune disease until it was too late. He raised a hand to his head and ran his fingers through his thinning hair. He pulled his hand away and stared at the clump of dark strands that came away with zero resistance. He had joked about going bald early. He had laughed when Tasha teased him about his receding hairline. But it was not genetics, it was chemistry. Suddenly, the memory hit him like a physical slap. The smoothies. Every single morning for the past 3 months, Tasha had insisted on making him a green detox smoothie. She said it was full of kale and spinach to help his heart. He remembered the taste. It was always slightly metallic, slightly bitter. When he complained, she would laugh and say that was just the spirulina. "Drink it all, baby," she would say, watching him like a hawk until the glass was empty. "It is good for you." He had thanked her. He had thanked his wife for waking up early to blend a cocktail of heavy metals that was slowly shutting down his internal organs. The betrayal was so absolute it was almost blinding. She had been poisoning him over breakfast while asking him about his day. She had been measuring his death in ounces and serving it with a smile. Connor pushed away from the desk, feeling the room spin. He was not just a victim of a bad marriage, he was a walking crime scene. And if he did not get that toxic sludge out of his system soon, the next time he closed his eyes would be the last. He grabbed his car keys and the USB drive. He needed a hospital, and he needed one that was far away from the influence of the Buckhead social circle where Tasha could find him. He was running for his life. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a frequency that seemed to drill directly into my skull. I sat on the edge of the paper-covered exam table in the private wing of Northside Hospital. It was 3 in the morning, and the silence of the corridor was broken only by the squeak of nurses' shoes. My arm throbbed where they had drawn 5 vials of blood less than an hour ago. I felt exposed and vulnerable, stripped of my suit and wearing a thin hospital gown. I was no longer the successful businessman or the husband. I was just a biological specimen waiting to see if I was expiring. The door opened and Dr. Sterling walked in. I had known him for years. We played golf at the same club. He usually walked in with a smile and a joke about my handicap, but tonight his face was a mask of professional concern. He did not look at me. He looked at the clipboard in his hand, turning the pages with a slow, deliberate movement that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "Connor," he said finally, his voice grave. "I rushed these samples through the emergency lab because of what you told me about your symptoms. I wish I could tell you that you were just paranoid." I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. "Tell me the truth, Doc. Am I sick?" Dr. Sterling looked up and met my eyes. "You are not sick, Connor. You are being poisoned." He held up the chart, pointing to a red line that spiked way above the normal range. "We found significant traces of thallium in your blood and urine. Thallium is a heavy metal that was used in rat poison until it was banned. It is tasteless and odorless. The levels we found are not high enough to kill you instantly, which suggests you have been ingesting small doses over a long period of time. Probably 3 or 4 months." The room seemed to tilt. 3 months. That was exactly when Tasha started her health kick. That was exactly when the morning smoothies became mandatory. Dr. Sterling continued, his voice tight with anger. "This causes nerve damage, hair loss, and eventually cardiac arrest. The accumulation in your system is dangerous, Connor. If you had waited another 2 weeks, if you had continued this diet, your heart would have simply stopped beating in your sleep. It would have looked like a natural heart attack. There would have been no autopsy unless someone asked for it." I sat there frozen. The realization was absolute. My wife had not just made a mistake, she was not just greedy, she was meticulously executing a plan to murder me in my own kitchen. She watched me drink that poison every morning. She wiped the green foam from my lip and told me she loved me, knowing she was killing me from the inside out. Dr. Sterling closed the folder with a snap. I am legally required to report this to the police, Connor. This is not a medical issue anymore. This is a crime scene, and your body is the evidence. I nodded slowly, feeling a cold resolve settle over me. Do it, I said. Call them. But do not release the report to the public yet. I need to handle something first. I need to survive long enough to bury her. I chose a small coffee shop in an industrial district on the outskirts of Atlanta for our meeting. It was the kind of place where truck drivers and shift workers went for caffeine, not the kind of place where buckhead socialites gossiped. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose the darkest booth in the back. When Connor walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. In the harsh fluorescent light, he looked gray. The dashing, confident businessman I had known for a decade was gone. In his place was a shell of a man trembling in a wrinkled shirt. He slid into the booth opposite me and didn't even order a drink. He just placed a crumpled piece of paper on the table between us. It was the toxicology report. I didn't need to read it to know what it said, but I looked at the red numbers anyway. It was the confirmation of everything I had suspected. Connor put his head in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake. I watched him fall apart. He wasn't crying loudly, just a silent, rhythmic sobbing that came from deep within his chest. She was killing me, Jasmine, he whispered, his voice cracking. Every morning she smiled at me and handed me a glass of poison. We talked about growing old together, while she was counting the days until I died. I reached out and covered his hand with mine, not for comfort, but to steady him. I needed him sharp, not broken. I know, Connor, I said softly. I know it hurts. But you have to stop crying. Tears are not going to save you. Strategy is. He looked up at me, wiping his eyes with a napkin. I am going to the police station right now, he said, his voice gaining a little strength. I am going to show them this report. Then I am calling my lawyer and filing for divorce. I am kicking her out of the house today. I shook my head slowly and firmly. No, you are not. Connor looked at me like I was crazy. What do you mean, no? She is trying to murder me. I am not spending another minute in that house. I leaned across the table, my eyes locking onto his. Listen to me, Connor. If you file for divorce today, she wins. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. She will claim the poisoning is a fabrication or a mistake. She will hire the best lawyers using your money. The court proceedings will drag on for years. She will get temporary alimony. She will get half the house. She will get half your pension. Is that what you want? Do you want to pay her millions of dollars to leave after she tried to kill you? Connor went silent, his mouth slightly open. He hadn't thought about the legal war. He was only thinking about survival. I continued, my voice low and cold. We do not want a divorce, Connor. We want a criminal conviction. If she is in prison for attempted murder, she gets nothing. The assets are safe. The children are safe. You keep your dignity and your money. But to get that, we need more than just traces in your blood. We need to catch her in the act. Connor looked terrified. You want me to go back there? You want me to live with her? I nodded. You have to go back. You have to pretend you don't know anything. You have to let her believe she is winning. We need to catch her buying the poison or mixing it. We need undeniable video proof that puts the bottle in her hand. Connor took a deep breath. The fear in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He realized that running away would only make him a victim. Fighting back would make him free. He picked up the toxicology report and folded it carefully, putting it back in his pocket. Okay, he said. Tell me what I have to do. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the sticky laminate table, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that barely rose above the hum of the coffee machine. We cannot just catch her poisoning you, Connor. That is domestic assault. She might get 10 years. She might be out in 5 for good behavior. And Marcus walks away free because we have no proof he handed her the bottle. I paused, letting the injustice of that sink in. I saw the anger flash in Connor's eyes. He wanted them both gone. To get them both to bury them under a mountain of evidence so heavy they never see daylight again, we need a conspiracy charge. We need to catch them celebrating the kill. Connor shook his head confused. Celebrating? What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. Tasha is a narcissist. She is careful when she is hunting, but she is sloppy when she thinks she has won. The moment she thinks the threat is gone, she will drop her guard. She will want to gloat. She will want to drink champagne and count her money. And we are going to give her that moment. I looked him dead in the eye. I am going to die tonight, Connor. At least that is what the Atlanta Police Department is going to tell her. Connor recoiled as if I had slapped him. You want to fake your death? He whispered loudly, causing a trucker in the corner to glance over. I shushed him with a sharp gesture. Lower your voice. Yes. I have already spoken to Detective Miller. He has seen the footage of the brake cutting. He is on our side. We are going to stage a crash site down at the River Gorge. They will tow my car there. They will plant the debris. And then 2 uniformed officers are going to knock on your front door at midnight. They are going to tell you and Tasha that my car went off the bridge and that there were no survivors. I watched Connor process the sheer scale of the deception. He looked terrified but also fascinated. You have to be the grieving brother-in-law, I continued, pressing on. You have to break down. You have to hold her. You have to let her believe she is finally safe. And the second she thinks you are asleep, she is going to call Marcus. She is going to invite him over to celebrate their victory. She will invite him into your home to toast to my death and your impending funeral. That is when we strike. We will have the house wired. The police will be in a surveillance van down the street. We will record every word they say. We will get the confession, the motive, and the method all in one night. It is a trap, Connor. And the bait is me. Connor stared at his hands for a long moment. He was tracing the grain of the wood on the table, his mind racing. He was realizing that this was not just a legal battle anymore. It was psychological warfare. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a spark of the old Connor, the man who used to close million-dollar deals. He nodded slowly. She will call him, he said, his voice steady. She will not be able to help herself. She loves to brag. He took a sip of water, his hand no longer shaking. Let us do it. Let us give her the best show she has ever seen. I smiled a cold, hard smile. Tonight we turn the hunters into the prey. The air at the impound lot on the south side of the city tasted of iron and decay, a sharp contrast to the perfumed air of Buckhead. I walked through the rows of mangled vehicles with the proprietor, a man who dealt in cash and silence. We stopped in front of a heap of twisted black metal. It was a Mercedes S-Class, or at least it used to be before it wrapped itself around a telephone pole. It was the perfect stunt double for my death. I counted out $5,000 in cash and placed the stack into the greased palm of the owner. I need it towed to the ravine off Old River Road, I told him. Drop it at the bottom. Then forget you ever saw me. He nodded, counting the bills with a practiced thumb. It will be there in an hour. I walked away feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. I was paying for my own funeral. Once the car was in position at the bottom of the gorge, I climbed down the steep embankment, the dry leaves crunching under my boots. The car looked horrifying, a broken skeleton of luxury lying in the dirt. But it needed to look fresh. It needed to look like a tragedy that had just happened. I uncapped the canister of gasoline I had brought with me and doused the leather seats, the dashboard, and the crushed hood. The smell of fuel was overpowering. I struck a flare and tossed it inside. The explosion was immediate, a whoosh of orange flame that engulfed the vehicle, sending black smoke spiraling into the night sky. I watched it burn for a moment, the heat searing my face. This was not just a prop. It was a pyre for the sister who used to love Tasha. That woman was burning in the wreckage. The woman who walked back up the hill was someone entirely new. While I orchestrated the destruction, Connor was fighting his own battle in the quiet of his study. He sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the contact name on his phone, Chief of Police Marcus Miller. Miller was not just a cop, he was a legacy appointment, a man who had served in Vietnam with Connor father. They were cut from the same cloth, men who believed in honor and protecting their own. Connor took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Connor, son? Everything all right? It is late." Connor cleared his throat, forcing his voice to be steady. "I need a favor, Chief. A big one. It involves Tasha. And it involves a murder investigation." He spent the next 10 minutes laying it all out. The toxicology report, the video evidence, the cut brake lines. He spoke with the cold precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, the chief spoke, his voice hard as granite. "Your father would be heartbroken to hear this, Connor, but he would be proud of you for making the call. We will have a team in place. I will send 2 of my best officers to deliver the notification at midnight. We will have the house bugged before she even opens the champagne." Connor hung up and leaned back in his chair. The pieces were moving. The stage was set. He looked out the window toward the dark driveway where the police cruiser would soon arrive. He was terrified, but for the first time in months he was not the victim. He was the architect of his own survival. The game had officially begun. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a full minute, staring at the leather steering wheel. I had to become an actor. I had to channel every ounce of pain I felt, not for Jasmine, but for the betrayal of my marriage, and use it to sell the lie. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and raw. I messed up my hair, loosening my tie, until I looked like a man who had been dragged through hell. I walked to the front door, my legs feeling heavy, not just from the performance, but from the thallium still circulating in my veins, making my nerves fire randomly. I opened the door, and the house was quiet. Tasha was in the living room, pacing back and forth. She was wearing her silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up, her eyes scanning my face with predatory intensity. "Connor," she asked, her voice trembling with fake concern. "Where have you been? You look terrible." I walked past her and slumped onto the sofa, burying my face in my hands. I let out a shuddering breath that wasn't entirely fake. The exhaustion was real. The grief for the life I thought I had was real. "The police called me," I said, my voice muffled by my palms. "About an hour ago. They found a car at the bottom of the Chattahoochee Ravine." I felt Tasha freeze. The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed in the background, a stark contrast to the violence I was describing. "A car," she whispered. "What kind of car, Connor?" She needed to hear it. She needed the confirmation before she could start the celebration. I looked up at her, my eyes watering. "A black Mercedes," I choked out. "It went through the guardrail on the curves near the old bridge." "It caught fire, Tasha. They said the fuel tank ruptured on impact. They said there was nothing left. It burned completely. There were no survivors." I watched her face closely. For a split second, I saw it. A flash of pure, unadulterated joy. Her eyes lit up. The corners of her mouth twitched upward before she caught herself. It was the look of a gambler who had just hit the jackpot. She had won. The debt would be paid. The insurance money was hers. I was the only loose end left, and I was fading fast. Then the performance began. "No," she shrieked, dropping her wineglass on the carpet. Red wine splattered like blood across the white wool. She threw herself onto me, wrapping her arms around my neck. "My baby sister." "No, God, please, no." She buried her face in my shoulder and began to wail. To anyone watching through the window, she was a grieving sibling, shattered by loss. But I was holding her. I could feel her body. She wasn't shaking with grief. She was trembling with adrenaline. I could feel the tension releasing from her muscles. She wasn't crying for Jasmine. She was crying with relief. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to shove her away. Her perfume, once my favorite scent, now smelled like corruption. I could feel her smiling against my neck. I knew she was smiling. "I am so sorry, Connor," she sobbed into my shirt. "I know you tried to help her. I know she was troubled. She was already rewriting the narrative. Jasmine was the troubled one. Jasmine was the accident." Tasha was the survivor. I patted her back mechanically, my hand feeling like it was touching a snake. "We have to be strong," I whispered, playing my part. "I am going to miss her." Tasha pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but they were bright. Too bright. "I need a moment," she said, sniffing. "I need to go upstairs and call Mom. Is that okay?" I nodded, looking at the floor to hide the disgust in my eyes. "Go," I said. "I will stay here." She kissed my forehead a Judas kiss and ran up the stairs. She wasn't going to call her mother. She was going to call her accomplice. The trap was sprung. The living room of the Buckhead estate had been transformed into a stage for the greatest performance of Tasha's life. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her posture rigid and composed, looking down at her daughter who was currently collapsed on the floor. Tasha clutched the hem of her mother's skirt, her body convulsing with sobs that sounded so raw and guttural they would have convinced a jury. She wailed about the tragedy of a life cut short. She screamed Jasmine's name until her voice cracked. "My poor baby sister," she howled, burying her face in the expensive fabric of Elizabeth's dress. She was all alone in the dark. Why did God take her and not me? It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Tasha knew exactly which buttons to press to trigger her mother's twisted sense of family honor. Elizabeth, usually so cold and pragmatic, actually reached down and stroked Tasha's hair. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was soft. "Hush now, Tasha. It is a terrible tragedy, but we must accept it." Jasmine was reckless. We always knew something like this might happen, given her erratic behavior lately. "You cannot blame yourself." Tasha lifted her head, her face a mask of blotchy red skin and smeared mascara. She had rubbed her eyes vigorously before Elizabeth arrived to ensure the swelling looked authentic. "But Mom," she choked out. "The car burned. There is nothing left to bury. How will we ever find closure?" Elizabeth sighed, the sound of a woman inconvenienced by drama rather than devastated by loss. "We will handle it. I will speak to the lawyers in the morning. The insurance policy will need to be processed immediately to cover the funeral costs and settle her affairs. You need to be strong for Connor. He looks like a ghost." Tasha nodded weakly, sniffing loudly. "You are right. I have to be the rock. I have to save this family." Elizabeth stood up, smoothing her dress. "I will go home and start making calls. Try to get some sleep, Tasha. Do not let this destroy you." The moment the heavy front door clicked shut and the sound of Elizabeth's car engine faded down the driveway, the transformation occurred. It was instantaneous and terrifying. Tasha stood up from the floor in one fluid motion. The trembling in her hands stopped immediately. The hunch in her shoulders vanished, replaced by the confident swagger of a predator who has just secured a kill. She walked to the large mirror hanging over the fireplace and wiped the fake tears from her cheeks with a cold precision. She stared at her reflection, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was not a smile of relief. It was a smile of pure malice. She did not look like a grieving sister. She looked like a lottery winner. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second, not hesitating, but savoring the victory. She dialed Marcus. The phone rang once before he picked up. Tasha did not wait for him to speak. Her voice was vibrant, electric with adrenaline. "It is done," she whispered, but the whisper carried the weight of a scream. "The police just left. The car is at the bottom of the gorge. It burned to a crisp, Marcus. There is no body, no evidence, just a pile of ash and twisted metal." She began to pace the room, her excitement spilling over. "And get this, they ruled it an accident. They think she lost control on the curve. No investigation, no questions. We are in the clear." She laughed, a sound that bounced off the high ceilings like shattered glass. "We are rich, baby. The policy pays out double for accidental death. That is $4 million. Plus the house, plus her portfolio. We own it all." She paused, listening to Marcus on the other end, her eyes gleaming. Connor. Oh, do not worry about him. He is upstairs in the bedroom, completely broken. He took a sedative and passed out. He is a wreck. He will not wake up until tomorrow noon. The house is empty, Marcus. It is just me and the victory. Come over, right now. I have a bottle of Dom Perignon that I have been saving for a special occasion. And I cannot think of a more special occasion than becoming a multimillionaire. The line went dead as she hung up. Tasha tossed the phone onto the sofa and spun around, her arms wide as if embracing the empty room. She walked over to the sound system and turned on soft jazz, setting the mood for a celebration. She had no idea that upstairs Connor was not asleep. He was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, his headphones pressing against his ears, listening to every word she had just said through the hidden microphones. And down the street, inside an unmarked van, a team of detectives was checking their weapons. The party was about to begin, but Tasha was not the guest of honor. She was the target. The headlights of a Porsche cut through the darkness of the driveway, sweeping across the front windows of the estate like searchlights. Inside the darkened living room, Tasha stood by the wet bar, her silhouette illuminated by the soft blue glow of the under-cabinet lighting. She was not preparing tea for a wake. She was chilling a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon in a silver bucket. The heavy front door swung open without a knock. Marcus stepped inside, bringing with him the smell of expensive cologne and the cool night air. He did not look like a man visiting a grieving family. He wore a grin that stretched from ear to ear, his eyes dancing with a malicious excitement. He closed the door softly behind him and locked it, the click echoing in the silent house. Tasha turned to face him, her silk robe slipping slightly off her shoulder. She did not say a word. She simply ran to him and threw her arms around his neck, burying her hands in his hair. He caught her effortlessly, lifting her off her feet as they spun in the foyer. The silence of the house was broken by their laughter, a sound that was profane in its cheerfulness. "Put me down," she giggled, slapping his chest playfully. "We have work to do. We have a toast to make." Marcus set her down, keeping his hands on her waist. "You are incredible," he whispered, looking at her with a mix of lust and greed. "I drove past the ravine on the way here. I saw the smoke rising." "You really did it, Tasha. You actually pulled it off." Tasha pulled away and walked back to the bar, her hips swaying. She wrapped her hand around the neck of the champagne bottle and pulled it from the ice. "It was an accident, Marcus," she corrected him with a wink, popping the cork. The sound was sharp and loud like a gunshot. Foam spilled over her fingers, but she did not care. She poured 2 flutes to the brim, the golden liquid fizzing with promise. She handed one to Marcus and raised hers high in the air. To gravity, she said, her voice dripping with irony, and to the S-class safety features that failed so miserably. Marcus clinked his glass against hers. "To the $4 million, he added, taking a long sip. "And to us." They drank deeply, the bubbles burning their throats, intoxicating them with the feeling of invincibility. They moved to the oversized Italian leather sofa, the same sofa where Connor had sat with his head in his hands only an hour ago. They collapsed onto the cushions, tangling their limbs together, spilling champagne onto the floor. Tasha rested her head on Marcus's chest, tracing the buttons of his shirt. "It was so easy," she murmured, staring at the ceiling. "Connor bought the whole story. He was sobbing like a child. He thinks he is supporting me, but really he is just signing the checks until he expires." 2 floors up in the master bedroom, the only light came from the screen of a laptop sitting on the duvet. Connor sat on the edge of the bed, perfectly still. He was wearing noise-canceling headphones, and the sound of his wife's laughter was being fed directly into his ears. On the screen, the hidden camera feed showed the living room in high definition. He watched the woman he had married 10 years ago stroking the chest of another man. He watched them drink the wine he had bought for their anniversary. He heard every word, to gravity, to the 4 million. He saw Marcus kiss her, a long, deep kiss that made Connor's stomach turn. He did not look away. He forced himself to watch. He needed this image burned into his retina forever. He needed to kill the last remaining part of him that still loved her. He looked at the audio levels bouncing on the recording software. Every syllable was being captured. The conspiracy was undeniable. Downstairs, the conversation shifted from celebration to logistics. Marcus ran a hand down Tasha's arm. "So what is the timeline for the husband?" he asked, his voice casual. "We cannot have him hanging around forever. He is going to want to manage the money." Tasha took another sip of champagne and sighed. "Do not worry about him. I upped the dosage in his tea tonight. He thinks it is a sedative, but it is a concentrated extract. He will be bedridden by tomorrow. A week, maybe 2 at the most. His heart is already weak. One night it will just stop. We will cremate him, have a lovely joint memorial service for him and Jasmine, and then we are free. We will move to Europe, Paris maybe, or Monaco." Connor listened to his own death sentence being planned. He looked at his own hands trembling slightly from the poison that was already in his veins. But the fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard rage. He reached for his phone and typed a single text message to the number saved as Chief Miller. The message was short. They confessed. Do it. He hit send and watched the screen. Downstairs, Tasha laughed again, oblivious to the fact that she was sitting on a trapdoor that was about to open. She leaned in to kiss Marcus again, whispering, "We are untouchable, baby. We are the kings of the world." Marcus swirled the golden liquid in his flute, watching the bubbles rise to the surface before disappearing just like he hoped Connor would. The adrenaline of the fake crash had worn off, and his natural paranoia was beginning to creep back in. He sat up straighter on the leather sofa, pushing Tasha slightly away so he could look her in the eyes. "The money from Jasmine is good, baby," he said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. "But it is not enough to sustain the lifestyle we want. Not in the long run. We need the estate. We need the portfolio." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, indicating the master bedroom above them. "What about the husband? What about the stumbling block upstairs?" Tasha smiled, a slow, predatory smile that did not reach her eyes. She took a long, languid sip of champagne and rested her head back against the cushions, staring at the chandelier. "You worry too much, Marcus. Connor is not a stumbling block. He is a stepping stone. And right now that stone is crumbling." She set her glass down on the coffee table with a sharp clink and turned her body to face him. "I told you I have been handling it. Why do you think he has lost 20 pounds in 2 months? Why do you think his hair is falling out in clumps on the pillow?" She giggled, a sound that was both girlish and grotesque. "He thinks it is stress. He thinks it is grief. But it is just simple chemistry. I bought a concentrated thallium solution from that shady exterminator in DeKalb County. Old school rat poison. Tasteless, odorless, and absolutely lethal in the right quantities." Marcus' eyes widened. He had known she was doing something, but hearing the specifics made the hair on his arms stand up. "You are using rat poison," he whispered. "Jesus, Tasha. Is that not traceable?" Tasha waved her hand dismissively. "Only if they look for it. And who looks for poison in a grieving husband who dies of a heart attack a week after his sister-in-law tragic accident? No one. The narrative is perfect. The broken-hearted man succumbs to the shock. It is poetic." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a husky murmur that was meant to be seductive but was being broadcast to the entire Atlanta Police Department. "I gave him a double dose in his chamomile tea right before he went up to bed. He drank every drop. I watched him swallow it. He is probably clutching his stomach right now, wondering why he hurts so much. A few more days of this, just a few more cups of tea, and his heart will simply give out. And then, Marcus, I will be the grieving widow, the sole heir to the Hamilton fortune. I will be the richest widow in Atlanta. And you and I will be drinking this champagne on a yacht in the Mediterranean while they bury him next to his parents." She laughed again, raising her empty glass. "To the rats," she said, "may they all die quietly." 2 floors above them, Connor sat in the dark, illuminated only by the blue light of his laptop screen. He was not clutching his stomach. He was sitting with the stillness of a statue. On his screen, he saw the live feed from the living room. He saw his wife mocking his pain. He heard her admit to purchasing the poison. He heard her map out the timeline of his murder. The audio waveform on the screen spiked with every word she spoke, but he was not the only one watching. In the unmarked surveillance van parked 3 houses down, Chief Miller sat with 2 other detectives. They were wearing headphones, their faces grim and set in stone. The audio feed was crystal clear. It was no longer a domestic dispute. It was no longer a suspicion. They had a confession to conspiracy to commit capital murder, recorded in high definition. Chief Miller took off his headset and looked at the team. "That is it," he said, his voice low and hard. "That is the ball game. We have the motive, we have the method, and we have the admission." He pressed the button on his radio that connected him to the tactical team waiting at the perimeter. "All units, this is Miller. The target has confirmed the poisoning of the victim inside the residence. We have an active threat to life. Execute the warrant. Go, go, go." Inside the house, Tasha reached for the bottle to pour another glass, unaware that her life as she knew it had exactly 30 seconds left on the clock. She was already spending the money in her head, already picking out the funeral dress. She did not hear the heavy boots hitting the pavement outside. She did not hear the safety catches clicking off on the service weapons. She only heard the sound of her own voice telling Marcus how smart she was. She had no idea that she had just narrated her own downfall. The soft jazz notes were obliterated in an instant. The quiet darkness outside the mansion erupted into a violent kaleidoscope of blinding blue and red lights that strobed through the sheer curtains like a disco ball from hell. The silence of the exclusive neighborhood was shattered by the wail of sirens, not 1 or 2, but a dozen converging on the driveway at once. Tasha froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. Marcus dropped his arm from around her shoulder, his eyes darting to the window in pure animalistic panic. Before either of them could draw a breath or formulate a question, the heavy oak front door was not opened, it was disintegrated. The booming crash of a battering ram splintering the wood echoed through the house like a cannon blast. Debris and splinters flew across the marble foyer as the lock gave way under the overwhelming force of the law. "Police, search warrant, get on the ground." The commands came in a wall of sound, overlapping and deafening. A swarm of tactical officers in heavy body armor poured into the hallway, their boots thundering on the floorboards. They moved with the precision of a machine, weapons raised, and blinding tactical flashlights cutting through the gloom. Tasha screamed a high-pitched sound of terrified confusion that was cut short as 2 officers stormed the living room. "Drop the glass. Drop it now." The command was barked by a man whose face was hidden behind a tactical visor. Tasha's hands shook so violently that the champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The expensive vintage splashed onto her bare feet, mixing with the shards of glass. Marcus scrambled backward over the sofa, trying to put distance between himself and the laser sights dancing on his chest. "Wait," he stammered, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "There is a mistake. We are grieving. We just lost a family member." He was still trying to play the role, still trying to use the lie as a shield. But the officers did not care about his script. "Get down on your stomach. Hands behind your back. Now." An officer grabbed Marcus by the collar of his designer shirt and hauled him over the couch, slamming him onto the rug with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Tasha stood paralyzed by the fireplace, her robe clutching tight around her. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her entitlement flaring up even in the face of a SWAT team. "Do you know who my husband is? This is harassment. I will have your badges for this." An officer advanced on her, not slowing down for her threats. "Mom, get on the ground." Tasha did not move, so he took her arms, spinning her around and forcing her down onto the Persian rug she loved so much. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked around her wrists, biting into her skin. She was face down in the carpet fibers, gasping for air, her mind unable to process the shift. 1 minute she was the queen of Atlanta, about to inherit millions. The next, she was a suspect with a knee in her back. She twisted her head, trying to look up, desperate to make eye contact with someone who would listen. "Connor," she screamed, hoping her husband would come down and stop this madness. "Connor, tell them to stop." But the only answer she got was the squawk of police radios and the heavy breathing of the man she was cheating with, lying handcuffed beside her. The party was over and the hangover was beginning immediately. The chaotic symphony of shouting voices and static radios suddenly dropped to a hushed murmur. The sea of blue uniforms parted in the foyer, creating a wide path from the shattered front door to the center of the living room rug, where Tasha lay pinned like a butterfly in a display case. Through the open doorway, a silhouette appeared against the backdrop of the flashing strobe lights. The figure stepped over the splintered remains of the doorframe. Click, click, click. The sound of stilettos on the marble floor was slow and rhythmic. It was the cadence of an executioner walking to the scaffold. Tasha strained her neck against the carpet, her eyes widening until they looked ready to split. Her brain was misfiring, sending signals that contradicted reality. She had seen the smoke, she had seen the fire, she had toasted to the ashes. Yet here, walking toward her in a tailored black suit that looked like it was cut from the midnight sky, was the woman she had murdered. "It is a ghost," Tasha screamed. The sound tore from her throat, a primal shriek of disbelief and terror. "Get it away from me! She is dead! I killed her! It is a demon!" She scrambled backward on the floor, her heels digging into the expensive rug, trying to push herself away from the apparition. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping that when she opened them, the hallucination would be gone. But when she opened them, the polished black shoes were inches from her face. Jasmine stood tall and immaculate. She was not burned. She was not broken. She looked more alive and more dangerous than she ever had in her life. She looked down at her sister with the dispassionate gaze of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "I am not a ghost, Tasha." Jasmine's voice was calm, smooth, and terrifyingly real. It cut through the room like a razor blade. Tasha looked up, trembling uncontrollably. Jasmine removed her sunglasses, slowly revealing eyes that held no warmth, no pity, and no sisterly love. They were the eyes of a stranger who had come to collect a debt. "I am something much worse," Jasmine said, leaning down slightly, so only Tasha could hear the final verdict. "I am your nightmare, and I am the reason you are going to die in a cage." Tasha gasped for air, her chest heaving, but how she stammered, tears of confusion mixing with the snot on her face. The car, the fire. Before Jasmine could answer, movement on the staircase caught Tasha's eye. She turned her head, and the final piece of her world crumbled. Connor was walking down the stairs. He was not stumbling. He was not clutching his stomach in pain. He was walking tall, holding his laptop under his arm like a weapon. He stopped beside Jasmine, forming a united front that Tasha had never anticipated. "You?" Tasha whispered. "You are supposed to be dying." Connor looked down at his wife with a detached, clinical curiosity. "I felt much better after I stopped drinking the tea," Connor said coldly. "And the audio on the live stream was excellent, by the way. The jury is going to love hearing you call me a stepping stone." The realization hit Tasha with the force of a physical blow. The game was not rigged in her favor. It had been rigged against her from the moment she cut the brake line. She looked from Jasmine to Connor, seeing the bond she had tried to sever now stronger than steel. She looked at Marcus, who was cowering on the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. She was completely alone. The grand narrative she had written for herself, where she was the brilliant widow and the wealthy heir, had been burned to ash, just like the decoy car in the ravine. Jasmine stepped closer, her shadow falling over Tasha's face. "You wanted a funeral, Tasha. You wanted to wear black and cry for the cameras. Well, you got your wish. This is the funeral of your freedom." Jasmine reached into her pocket and pulled out a single item. It was the invitation to the charity gala Tasha had been bragging about attending next week. Jasmine tore it in half slowly, letting the pieces flutter down onto Tasha's chest. "You won't be needing this. Where you are going, the only social event is roll call." Jasmine looked up at the officers and nodded. Get this trash out of my house. As the officers hauled Tasha screaming to her feet, Jasmine turned to Connor. They did not hug. They did not celebrate. They just stood there, the survivors of a war, watching the enemy be dragged away into the night. The spectacle outside the mansion was the kind of scene that would be whispered about in Buckhead country clubs for decades. Tasha was not walking with the grace of a debutante anymore. She was being hauled down the front steps by two officers who had zero patience for her hysterics. Her silk robe was torn at the shoulder, and her bare feet scraped against the rough concrete of the driveway. She was screaming about her rights, about her lawyer, and about the injustice of the universe, but nobody was listening. The neighbors had gathered at the edges of their manicured lawns, watching the downfall of the aspiring queen bee with a mixture of shock and schadenfreude. The blue lights painted their faces in ghostly hues as they watched Tasha Hamilton get shoved into the back of a squad car like a common criminal. She pressed her face against the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes locking onto Jasmine, who stood on the porch like a statue of retribution. Just as the officer was about to slam the car door, a black Bentley screeched into the driveway, bypassing the police barricade with a display of arrogance that ran in the family. It was Elizabeth. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, her perfectly coiffed hair in disarray for the first time in her life. She did not run to her daughter because she loved her. She ran because she saw the flashing lights and knew her reputation was incinerating. She pushed past a rookie cop waving her hands frantically. "Stop this immediately!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do you know who we are? Unhand my daughter. This is a misunderstanding. We are a respectable family. You are making a mistake." She reached for the handle of the police car, trying to open it, but the door was locked. Tasha banged on the window from the inside, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets, mouthing, "Mom, save me!" Elizabeth spun around, her eyes wild, searching for someone to blame. Her gaze landed on Jasmine and Connor standing side by side on the porch. She charged toward them, her heels clicking furiously on the pavement. "Jasmine," she spat, her face contorted with rage. "Tell them to stop. Tell them this is a family dispute. How dare you let them humiliate us like this? Have you no shame? You are destroying your sister over a car, over money. You are evil, Jasmine. You are a vindictive little girl." She reached out as if to grab Jasmine's arm to shake her into submission, but she never made contact. Connor stepped forward. He moved with a speed and authority that stopped Elizabeth in her tracks. He placed his large frame between Jasmine and her mother, acting as a human shield. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply held up a thick manila envelope that was sealed with the stamp of a high-powered law firm. Elizabeth stopped, panting heavily, her hand hovering in the air. Connor looked down at her, not with the deference of a son-in-law, but with the judgment of a man who had seen behind the curtain. "You do not get to speak to her," Connor said, his voice low and dangerous. "You do not get to speak to either of us ever again." Elizabeth blinked, confused by his tone. "Connor, what are you doing? Help us. We can fix this. We can pay them off. Just tell them it was a prank." Connor shook his head slowly, a look of profound disgust on his face. "There is no fixing attempted murder, Elizabeth. There is no paying off the fact that your daughter tried to stop my heart with rat poison." Elizabeth's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She knew. Of course she knew. But hearing it said out loud in front of witnesses shattered her denial. Connor thrust the envelope into her chest, forcing her to grab it. "Inside that envelope is a petition for immediate divorce," he said, cold and precise. "It also contains a restraining order barring Tasha from coming within 500 feet of me or the children. And there is a second restraining order in there, Elizabeth. For you." Her eyes widened. "Me? But I am their grandmother." Connor took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to step back toward the police cars. "You are not a grandmother. You are a co-conspirator. You knew she was gambling away our savings and you did nothing. You knew she was desperate enough to kill and you encouraged her to target Jasmine. You nurtured her greed. You watered her narcissism. You raised a monster, Elizabeth, and you let her loose in my house. Elizabeth began to sob, but it was the weeping of a woman who had lost her power, not her heart. Connor. Please, she whimpered, clutching the envelope. I did it for the family. We have to stick together. Connor laughed, a harsh, dry sound. The family is dead. You killed it. Now you can go to the station and watch your masterpiece get booked for conspiracy to commit murder. Live with that. Live with the fact that your legacy is a prison sentence. He turned his back on her, signaling to the officers that they were done. Get her off my property, Connor said over his shoulder. Elizabeth stood there alone on the driveway, clutching the divorce papers that symbolized the end of her access to the Hamilton fortune. She watched the police car drive away, carrying her favorite daughter to a cell. She watched Connor and Jasmine walk back into the house and close the heavy oak door, shutting her out forever. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the cold concrete, weeping into the darkness, surrounded by the ruin of everything she had built. The siren faded into the distance, leaving only the silence of justice. The city lights of Atlanta sprawl out beneath me, a grid of gold and amber stretching to the horizon. I am back on my balcony, the same place where this story started. The glass of Pinot Noir in my hand is the same vintage, but the woman holding it is entirely different. The storm that was raging outside has passed, and the air is crisp and clean. It has been 18 months since the police lights painted the walls of Connor House blue. 18 months since I watched my sister dragged away screaming into the dark. The legal process was long and ugly, just as I expected. Tasha tried everything. She hired a team of lawyers who tried to paint me as the manipulator and her as the victim of coercion. She cried on the stand wearing a white dress and a cross around her neck, trying to charm the jury one last time. But you cannot charm your way out of a 4K video recording. The jury watched her sip champagne and plan her husband's death with a smile. They heard her laugh about the poison. It took them less than 3 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit capital murder. Attempted murder in the first degree. Insurance fraud. The judge was a woman who had no patience for crocodile tears. She sentenced Tasha to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of parole for at least 20. The last time I saw my sister, she was trading her silk robes for an orange jumpsuit, her jewelry confiscated, and her head shaved for lice. She looked at me across the courtroom, not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. She still believes she was wronged. She still believes I stole her life. But she is rotting in a cell while I stand here breathing the free air. Marcus turned on her immediately, of course. He took a plea deal, testifying against her to save his own skin, getting 10 years in exchange for his cowardice. They deserve each other. As for Connor, he survived. It took months for the thallium to fully leave his system. He lost his hair for a while and he walked with a cane for the better part of a year, but his body healed. His heart healed too. He divorced Tasha in record time, and with the evidence of the murder plot, he kept everything. The house, the custody of the children, the portfolio. He sold the mansion in Buckhead. He said it smelled like lies. He bought a smaller place near the park with a big yard for the kids. I saw him a few weeks ago at a coffee shop. He was with a woman, a pediatrician with kind eyes and a soft laugh. She does not care about his money, and she certainly does not make him green smoothies. He saw me and nodded. We did not speak. We do not need to. We are veterans of the same war, connected by the scars we share, but we both know that I am a reminder of the darkness he wants to forget. I am happy for him. He escaped. My mother, Elizabeth, has become a ghost in her own life. The scandal destroyed her social standing. The country club revoked her membership and her friends stopped returning her calls. She sits alone in her big empty house, surrounded by portraits of a family that no longer exists. She sends me letters, sometimes begging for money or forgiveness. I burn them unopened. I learned that you cannot heal a limb that is gangrenous. You have to cut it off to save the body. I am an orphan by choice, and I have never felt more whole. People ask me about the car. They ask if I sold the Mercedes S-Class, if I could ever bear to sit in it again, after knowing my sister crawled underneath it with bolt cutters. They think it is cursed. They think it is a coffin on wheels, but they are wrong. I look down at the street where my black Mercedes is parked under the streetlight. It is gleaming, pristine, and powerful. I did not sell it. I had the brake lines replaced with reinforced steel. I had the engine tuned to perfection. I drive it every single day. When I slide into that leather seat and grip the steering wheel, I do not feel fear. I feel total control. That car is not a symbol of her betrayal. It is a trophy of my survival. It is the machine that carried me through the fire and brought me out the other side. I take a sip of the wine, letting the rich, dark liquid settle on my tongue. I won. Not because I was richer or smarter, but because I was willing to see the truth when it was ugly. I stopped trying to buy love from people who only wanted to sell me out. I realized that blood does not make you family, loyalty does. I place the glass on the railing and look out at the city one last time. The night is quiet, the predators are in cages, and I am the driver of my own life. I smile, and the reflection in the glass smiles back. Cheers to the brakes that did not fail. The most profound lesson from Jasmine's journey is that family is defined by behavior, not blood. We often tolerate toxicity from relatives that we would never accept from strangers blinded by obligation. But as Connor learned, ignoring red flags can be fatal. This story serves as a stark reminder that self-preservation is not selfish. It is necessary. You cannot buy love from those who view you merely as a financial resource. True freedom begins the moment you stop enabling your abusers, set ironclad boundaries, and realize that it is better to walk alone than to sleep next to a traitor. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and survival.